I think the first question is from Kristen.
Thanks so much, Rachel, Siraj, and Christopher. I guess I have a question for each of you. So Siraj, I just have a quick question that may be basic, but so in the idea of progress, I kind of like understand, that the Enlightenment assumptions about progress carry with it its own kind of like, we can call it a theory of change or like a theory of transformation, which is just like future oriented, like things improve as time passes, this kind of temporal assumption that improvement is awaiting always. I wondered then if that's the case, does your concept of dilation have a theory of transformation, or would you suggest that there's like a baked in account or counter account to how transformation or change would take place through dilation? Is it about a kind of like extended tarrying that then produces something else, or would you say that like the expectation for a moment after is part of the kind of progressive logic at work on thinking about dilation? Does that make sense? So that's my question there. And then Christopher, I guess I was really interested in hearing your presentation after Siraj's, because I wanted to maybe hear you speak to the extent to which you understand collecting as itself a kind of future oriented or progressive task. So to me, when I think of the collector or collecting as a project, I can't help but think about kind of the status reflection of the collector, and that's a status symbol or something that is accumulated over time and after the passage of time, wherein one accumulates slowly. And so I just wondered if that puts pressure on or interrupts or moves on how you're thinking about collecting. So thanks to you both.
Thank you so much for that question. I think that I would want to, so yes, to begin, I would say that definitely there is this sense of like inevitability or determinism in this conception of, in this original conception of progress that is guarded against in much of the sort of contemporary reconstruction of it, where this forward-looking dimension of progress is, emphasizes agency, emphasizes hope, and emphasizes indeterminacy. And then as for the piece about dilation, I want to say, I'm not sure if I would say that, so if I understand your question correctly, I think I would say that yes, there is a sense of futurity or a sense of a next moment to come that I do think is baked into the concept of dilation. I think that part of what I was trying to get at was that I think dilation isn't about stoppage, is not about a stationary quality, but rather that it's about slowness, and that what it might do is to provide a stronger kind of sensitivity to the fact that time is moving, to the fact that there is a next moment to come and that is already coming, and that that each moment is opening onto the future, and yet to try to kind of slow that process down. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I also want to thank you for that great question. And in a way, that's the question that haunts any attempt to make a sort of theoretical recuperation of collecting, right? Is that we can think of so many like absolutely terrible instances of collecting, so many forms of collecting that are not just pro-social or socially sanctioned, but upon which certain worrying social formations entirely depend, right? A collection certainly could be called a collection, a bank, right, could be called a collection of money. But it seems as a collection to still operate very differently than, say, a dragon's hoard of gold, right? Or the miser's own hoard. And so I think that a lot of what Benjamin's trying to do here is think of a model of collecting, right, that is in fact very different from investment, right? Something that's in a sense pure form of collection other than really just anything that could be called accumulation or grouping together or investment. So the museum, for example, upon close scrutiny, right, immediately reveals itself as by Benjamin's terms, imperfect collection insofar as that's a collection that is, as you point out, right, a status symbol. It's a collection that confers social honor, social advantage, and even in its most like sponsored message, right, it's supposed to teach and edify the public. So I think that he's trying to work away from those kind of models and think about a form of collecting that is in fact very different than that, and it is in fact very much not a progressive task, really in many ways the opposite of a progressive task. Not the investment is the progressive collection, right? So to also answer your question about, to now talk a bit more about the notion of progress here, right? And this was such a happy serendipity, Siraj also talked about Benjamin's critique of a particular model of progress. I think that for Benjamin, the collection has to be a step against progress, because here he takes a surprising move of prioritizing stasis, atemporality, something that even looks like death or stone, something which by no means seems positive, as at the very least a dire refuge from a certain progressive model of history, which is for him worrying, one, because it's an easily reified sort of master narrative, but two, because that narrative of history means that we no longer actually have to pay attention to things, right? They're mere obvious symptoms, reflections of a causal historical chain. And I think he's really interested in trying to see what happens when we instead look at the objects. So thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for those answers and for the question. We have another question now from Tanvir, and I just want to say, abusing my moderator position, that I love that these conversations are not just happening between panelists on one panel, but across the panels. That feels very political concepts appropriate. So Tanvir, take it away.
Hey, Christopher and Siraj, both thank you so much for these excellent talks. I really enjoyed both. Siraj, when you were talking about dilation, the first thing that came to my mind was this other concept, a Sufi concept called Ibn al-Waqt, the child of the moment, whereby one basically inhabits infinity. It's a theological notion, a religious notion, in which one actually manages to slow down in that sort of way, or effectively stop the perception of time. And the reason why I bring it up is because I wanted to ask you how dilation and progress might interact with those who might conceive of the human being as not somebody who's necessarily embedded within time, whereby we're moving through it, but actually as processing reality by means of time, in that there are those who thought or still do think of reality as not necessarily key to that same sort of change over time or linear time, but rather like we're all processing this singular reality in the only way that the limited human brain can somehow get all these sorts of moments is by arranging them in this time. Like we're all sharing the giant hologram. I mean, whether it's contemporary physics or Scientology or Sufism or anything, these sorts of things I think do happen. So just wanted to ask you if it's not too crazy to comment on how the concepts which you're bringing up right now might interact with these other mentalities. Thanks.
I'm really grateful for that question, and I will just say I don't really know. I don't know if I have a clear answer to that. I think I definitely want to be. I think that to maybe one way to get at a response to that question would be to say that this old or original kind of conception of progress as this sort of linear deterministic and teleological movement certainly doesn't seem workable, and that reconstructions of it should, and I think do, take license in jettisoning some fundamental features of the original conception of progress. And I think that I certainly want to remain open to this, to what you're suggesting, or to what you're inviting me to think about, which is that this sort of idea that there is an objective quality to time that is linear, and that our brains are sort of correct in formulating this kind of sequence of moments, that might be something that we might not want to take at face value. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say on that right at this second, but I thank you for the question.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we're coming up on the very end of our time, but just quickly before we end, one thing that hearing you both in conversation really brought up for me is sort of the way that, or wanting to question, when things are useful and when they become, a burden or a barrier. Chris, you talk about the collector of useless things on the one hand, like Benjamin creating his own system of value and pursuing something outside of the market. Then you also talk about these hoarders, right? Dying, collapsing under the weight of their own collections. And Siraj, you're thinking, I think, along similar lines about progress and the ways that it's been a pernicious concept and the way that people want to rescue that and revive it. So if you guys just wanted to reflect maybe for a minute or so on that question, or how hearing each other has made you think about maybe your own project differently, just wanted to invite you to give any final thoughts before we close. You're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. I can maybe go first this time and say that, obviously the question of use is really important here, but I think that, and this isn't something I got to really talk about in the scope of the talk I gave, but I think that a lot of, what Benjamin's trying to do here is not necessarily say go, right, like go collect things, go have things that are useless to you all around your home, and yeah, trap under the weight of your personal debris. But I do think that there's something sort of almost academically prescriptive in what he's doing, insofar as this provides a model for what we can do with the things of history critically, right, or theoretically even. And so part of why there's this emphasis on newness and novelty, and not just relying on things that we think in advance are useful to us, is that when we're only looking for things that are that fall under, under the rubric of being good or bad for a theory that we already have, right? We can only really support or reject what we already think, right? We're not opening ourselves to new models that might arise from objects that we don't already think or know in advance are going to be of use to us. And I think, we see that, of course, all across his own writing and his interest in what seems like odd, ephemera, erratic, kitsch things. Sorry.
Yeah, I think what's coming up for me in reflecting on this question, I'm noticing that in the Q&A there are some questions about the figure of the child and the child collector and natality, and I think that really also speaks to a pretty robust point of connection between both of our projects, and I think yeah, that this point that Chris is making about the way, like, this attachment to objects or to ephemera, that I think I heard you say we might not know what use they might have for us, or we might not know what sort of possibilities they might open for us in advance, right? But I think that one point that I'm taking from that is that feels to me like a kind of furthering of this idea of dilation, right? That there's this a kind of discovery or a kind of opening up that is made possible through it.
Awesome. That's all the time we have. There are a number of really great and interesting questions in the Q&A that I'm going to invite folks to bring on over to the Slack under day 2, or further questions. There's either channel would work for that. Thank you everybody for your time. Thank you, Chris and Siraj, for wonderful presentations. I hope to see you all tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for our final day. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you all.